Hey everyone, welcome to another video here at Life as a Law Student. As you know, my name is Nicole and I am a 1L at Washington University. Today I am joined by my friend Steve Schwartz, who is an LSAT coach that I created a LSAT prep course with. I'm super excited about. You can get more information about that at my website, linked in the description below. But Steve, would you like to say hello?
Yeah, sure. Hey, everyone. Nicole, thanks for having me. A pleasure as always.
Definitely. I've done a couple of videos with you, Steve, and I'm really excited about the one that we're launching today. This was a webinar that we actually recorded back in December. It was advertised on my Instagram, but I know some of you couldn't make it, so we decided to upload it here for you to enjoy. I know that the LSAT is coming up very soon for some of you, and we want you to be prepared with all of the best tips and tricks in the business. And Steve is definitely my go-to guy for those, especially with all the changes. Steve, what are some of the most important things that we talked about in this webinar that people need to know and be prepared for the upcoming LSAT for?
Sure. I think first and foremost would be the digital LSAT prep specifically. The LSAT has gone digital, but there's a lot of outdated materials out there. And so you want the best prep possible for the new digital format, getting ready for the tablet, getting ready for all the various features and tips and tricks that you'll need to succeed on the new digital LSAT. So that's the biggest thing. The second thing I would say is self-study advice, how to structure your LSAT study plan so that you know exactly what to be doing every single day over the course of your prep.
Yeah. And the latter thing that you just mentioned was something that was super crucial for me in my study process that I've talked about in other videos. So I can't wait for you guys to watch this webinar. I hope it helps you. And if it does, go ahead and leave that in the comments below. We're not going to have our typical ending for this video. So until next week, God bless.
Well, great to see you. How'd law school treat you?
I'm still here and the first semester's over, so I'd say pretty good. Definitely glad to be on break though.
Awesome. Congrats. Well, I'm glad you made it through that part of it. And that's the hardest part, right? It only gets easier from there, I'd imagine.
For sure. And I'm super glad we're talking about the LSAT today as it's changing. It's kind of interesting to look back at like how that was my biggest worry 2 years ago now. And now my biggest worry is how do I get a job for the summer and how do I pass all these classes? And oh, I hope that I got a good grade on the exams that I just took last week.
Right. So that bit of perspective, I'd imagine, at least helps to diminish the importance of the LSAT relative to the other many things you have before you, like 1L and the bar exam, right? So it's just one step in a long line.
Absolutely. And I think looking back on it, it's like, oh, the LSAT was nothing compared to law school. I don't know if that's encouraging or really scary, but I think if somebody can approach the LSAT as really a stepping stone into what law school requires, it gives them a good place to look at law school going forward.
Exactly. And the funny thing is they actually relate quite a bit. Your LSAT logical reasoning, LSAT reading comprehension especially. Would you say in your experience in law school that you've seen some of those connections?
Oh, totally. I mean, you're definitely not going to be asked LSAT questions in law school, but the exact same skills that you need to succeed on the LSAT are exactly translatable to what you need to do in law school, especially reading comprehension and logical reasoning. I think logic games are fun and it's a good way to practice study habits and learning a new way to think about something. I don't know if that skill translated as directly as the other two, but I think all three were really important stepping stones for me going into school.
For sure. And so tell me, you studied for the LSAT, what, last year, right?
Yeah, was it even that long? Yeah,
Isn't that long ago?
Yes, yeah.
And I think you mentioned in one of your videos, use one of my study plans, right?
Yeah, I did. I'm a little fuzzy on it, so if anyone's watching this, you need to go check out the website and not take my word for it, because it was a while ago, and I've looked at a lot of stuff since. But I remember just like crazy searching through Google, like how in the world to even start approaching studying for the LSAT. I just really wasn't finding anything, and so I really appreciated the free resources on your site that weren't, I don't know if I use them so much as like, this is how you study, but especially the study calendar in approaching beginning studying a certain way, just because I had no idea how to even start.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. And I've only really started talking a bit more about what led to the creation of those study plans. Because you look at it, it's like week 1, week 2, week 3, and then within each week, day by day exactly what to do. But the underlying principles, I think, in a way, are a little bit more important than the exact specific nature of do this on day one, do this on day two. And those principles are basically to build the foundation first before you get into doing timed practice tests or even individual timed sections. Just learn the fundamentals. And that's what the course is all about. It's basically learning the theory, then applying that theory to individual questions, then sections, then full-length exams.
Right, absolutely. And for me, who's somebody who didn't end up hiring an LSAT coach and just relied on free resources and then the PowerScore Bibles, having that free resources as a jumping off point of just like the outline and the basic theory behind studying for the test, I can only imagine how if LSAT's coaching is something that someone would like to pursue, it'd be incredibly helpful because just the free stuff was super helpful for me.
Yeah, I would imagine so. The study plans are basically the wealth of my experience that I put together to give it to you bite-sized so that if you don't have somebody, there's no ambiguity about what to do. Read these chapters, watch these videos, then do this type of practice problem. So I'll say for ordering games, read the textbook on ordering games, watch the videos on that, then do these specific ordering games out of these exams. Because when you look at a full prep test, everything is scrambled up and you don't really know which question type you're dealing with. And it's not on you to figure it out because you're just learning, right? So why not have someone else show you which problems to work on at a given point in time?
Yeah. And I think that reflects how just learning in general works too, as, okay, read something about it, watch something about it, hear something about it, and then actually try to put it into practice and see how you do. It makes sense to have those different types of resources for the optimal success and performance on the LSAT.
Totally.
Well, I have a couple questions, if you don't mind, that I know some of your students have sent in and some of my subscribers from my YouTube channel have sent in. Do you think we could jump into some of those?
Yeah, sure. Let's do it.
All right, so let's start with like really general stuff. And I know we talk a lot about this in your more specific courses. But one thing that a lot of people keep coming to me for, and it's actually one of my most viewed LSAT prep videos, is on reading comprehension. I feel like that's something that I know for me, you think like, I know how to read. I'm however 20 something years old. Like I figured that out by now. And it's hard to think about how to study reading. So what are some general tips that you get from students? I imagine you get this question a lot. On just how to approach that exam if somebody keeps being tripped up on how to study for it.
Yeah, well, first off, if you're bored by LSAT reading comp or logical reasoning, I mean, you're certainly not alone. They do that by design. They purposely ramp up the difficulty level or the boringness of a given passage. They always say that the passages are adapted from real world sources, but they are rewritten by LSAC to be more like legal contracts, for example, where they're burying things and they're using more complex language than they otherwise would. And so you have to feign interest. You have to fake it till you make it. And part of that is oversimplifying what's in the passage. So if there are major viewpoints, caricaturing them or exaggerating them. So liberal or conservative, or old versus new, or right versus wrong, or incomplete versus relatively more complete. Whatever it takes for you, that's what you've got to do. The other thing I'll say is for the digital LSAT specifically, get accustomed to reading difficult text on a screen. Usually what we read on screens is lower quality than what we read in books, but LSAT reading comp is now on the digital LSAT on that tablet. And so get used to it. You could read The Economist, you could read Scientific American, or you could just read LSAT passages. If you have the PDFs, you could load them up on your tablet or computer to read them there. And there are a couple of websites I'll recommend where you can put yourself on a reading comprehension treadmill of sorts to display text to you at increasingly fast speeds. The websites are Spreeder, Spreeder, and phrasereader.com. Both of those you can copy paste in text and put it at 500 words per minute or 400 words per minute or 200 words per minute and just get used to displaying it to yourself at that speed. By the way, I saw someone raise their hand here. Feel free to just type questions in the chat as they come up for you, and we'll do our best to intersperse them into the conversation.
Definitely. I'm totally new to Zoom, so if I miss something, I will figure it out as we go.
Sure.
Awesome. Well, I think that really helps the idea behind reading comprehension. I know for me, I don't think I realized until I was done with the LSAT, and thankfully I did well enough that I was like, I'm not going to take this again the first time. But something I realized when it was over is how important speed is for the reading comprehension section. I think that was the one section I had trouble finishing, which was surprising to me because I've always been a very fast and avid reader. But you're totally right. The idea of like the comprehension level of being required is so high, and you need to sum it up into something simple, which is difficult to do without a time limit. But I definitely agree that those types of websites would be really helpful, and I wish looking back I would have used them. Okay, you mentioned the Digital LSAT. So another thing that I get questions on a lot from my subscribers is regarding the Digital LSAT, specifically, what do you have to do to study differently for it? Do you need to buy a tablet? Is a computer sufficient? I'm sure that you have all kinds of research and knowledge on this too.
Yeah, sure. So a computer is unfortunately not sufficient because it doesn't have the touch screen. And if you really want to simulate a tablet experience, you've got to have a tablet. And unfortunately, LSAC's familiarization tool, where they have put 3 LSATs in the digital format, that does not work well on smartphones, and not all the functionalities are present on the computer. And so I hate to keep telling people to buy something, but it's worth the investment. You could even get an Amazon Fire tablet for $100 or $150, depending upon the size. And my LSAC is using a Microsoft Surface Go 10-inch tablet. So I would recommend getting a tablet of about 10 inches. If you have an iPad, that's perfectly fine. If you have a Samsung, that's perfectly fine. The importance is that it's a tablet and that it has a touch screen. And ideally that you can use a stylus as well. If you don't have a tablet or don't want to get one, I hear you. Just treat your books like they're screens, meaning don't write on them. You can't write on the questions on the Digital LSAT. You can only use some very limited annotation tools like highlighting and underlining. So you can do that, but nothing else. You do get scratch paper of a booklet of 12 to 14 pages. So get used to doing all your work to the side. Don't write on your books at all. Keep them clean.
Wow, that is so different than I studied. I feel bad for everybody else, but you'll make it through. You can do it.
Well, it's a mix. It's not all bad. There are some good things.
That's true.
One good thing. Yeah, we did. Yeah. So one good thing is that there's a countdown timer, so it removes any ambiguity that a proctor could potentially screw up the timing. It's automated now, so that's good. They won't forget to give you the 5-minute warning either, because that's also automated onto the tablet. Another good thing is that you can flag questions to come back to them later. At one glance, you could see all the questions you flagged in a given section. So that removes a little bit of the guesswork. And so that's a good thing. I think that's nice.
That's true, definitely. We have another question. Is it true that you don't have to answer all 25 questions on LR, and are they weighted differently?
Well, I mean, you don't have to do anything. But if you want to get the most points possible, if you want the highest score, I would suggest, in all seriousness, doing everything, because there's no penalty for guessing. So you want a top score, answer everything. Even if you run out of time, at the 5-minute warning or when there's 1 or 2 minutes left, just bubble in D for everything. But don't leave anything blank. There's no penalty for guessing. As for the weighting of questions, they're all weighted equally. And so an easy question is worth the same as a hard question, which means knock out the easy questions first. Get your lowest hanging fruit first. If you run out of time, it might as well be on the toughest questions that you had the lowest odds of success on, but you don't want to leave those blank. Definitely put down something.
Yeah, definitely. I think that equal weight was a huge relief to me taking the LSAT, and especially with the Digital LSAT being able to flag the things that are hard. You just go like quick skim of the question takes 5 seconds. Like, okay, that's going to take me more than the average amount of time to get through. Flag it, move on to the easy ones for sure.
Totally. Yeah, I would flag 3 or 4 questions when I'm taking it. Even on paper, I would do that. And I would certainly do that on digital.
Definitely. Speaking of the digital, we have more questions on that. Is it going to be digital forever? Like, what does it mean that the LSAT is digital? Where do you think it's going from here? When should we be expecting more major changes to the LSAT?
So I don't think it's going to change away from digital. I think typically the forward march of progress dictates that it remains digital. The rollout for digital is only in North America right now. It's still paper and pencil overseas. Okay. I expect that with time in the next couple of years, they will roll out the digital there also, but it's a question of getting tablets halfway around the world and maintaining their upkeep and such, and potential security issues there as well. So it may take some time. Additionally, there were a lot of tech issues with the digital rollout this year. LSAC kind of rushed things all of a sudden, perhaps due to GRE competition, perhaps due to having a new president in office at LSAC who wanted to make some changes quickly. But there have been a number of tech issues with tablets malfunctioning in various ways, but hopefully it will get progressively better with time. And so if you took it in July or September, you may have had issues. Hopefully in January, there will be even fewer issues moving forward. As far as where it goes from here, I think LSAC will just get better at reducing the number of issues and hopefully have things running as smoothly as possible. The other big change is that they've increased the number of test dates from previously only being 4 times a year to now being 10 times a year. And so I think one direction we'll see is more frequent LSATs. I think eventually they may move to every single month. Wow. They may, I don't know if they'll ever get to every single day like the GRE or the GMAT, because the complexity of writing LSAT problems is tougher than just substituting numbers like they can on math problems. So they can't produce that many questions, but I could imagine one day them having a large question bank or pool of thousands of questions where each administered LSAT would be unique from every other one due to a large mixing of questions. So, but that would be in the distant future. I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Definitely. And speaking of changes, I know that there's a new LSAT retake limit. Could you address that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So most recently, the policy was you could take the LSAT an unlimited number of times, which I think was awesome because there's no penalty for retaking because law schools only take the highest score. They do not average multiple scores. So why wouldn't you take it again if there was any chance you could do better? Obviously, taking it 7 or 8 times looks a little bit flaky, but 3 or 4 times, totally fine. Now the new retake limit is you can only take it 3 times in one admission cycle. Admission cycles run from June to May of the following year, 5 times in 5 years, 7 times for life, and if you get a 180, you can't take it again. Why do these limits exist? I think it's because with LSAC offering the test more frequently, like 10 times a year, like I said, they have to reuse a lot of old unadministered exams. And if someone is taking all of those administrations, they might see the same questions multiple times, which would certainly be unfair. It would compromise the integrity of the test. And so they want to limit the number of times that could happen. And could it happen occasionally? Yeah, it could. Somebody could take it overseas 1 month and then take it in North America the next month and maybe get the same test form. Could that happen? Potentially, but the number of people affected would be minuscule, would be infinitesimally small. So not a huge concern for them, but they do want to limit that overall. And so that's part of the reason for the limit.
Sure. And I don't know if you would agree with this, but my personal opinion, as far as taking it only 3 times an admission cycle, from studying the LSAT fairly recently in my life, I don't think that taking it more than 3 times in an admission cycle is advisable anyway, even if you were allowed to do that. I think if you want to see significant improvement, it's going to take more time than, what would that be, 2 or 3 months. I mean, that I think is enough time to make small improvements for sure. But if you get something in the 150s and you're hoping for a score in the 170s, that's definitely achievable. I totally am a firm believer that the LSAT is a learnable test, but it does take time, and it might take years. I know somebody who's in my subscriber base who has been taking the LSAT for 2 or 3 years now because she knows she can do better, but hasn't been able to really invest that time yet that it would take to make such a significant improvement. So I wouldn't worry too much about the new retake limit, although it's something to be aware of for sure.
I would certainly agree with that. I think that you don't want to take it 3 consecutive months, for example. Like someone could have theoretically taken it in September, October, and November, all consecutive months, but is there any logic to that really? Are you really going to improve that much in 1 month and then yet another month? I think if you were to take it 3 times in one cycle, you want to space those out as widely as possible. Maybe you would do July, then November, then I don't know, February or March.
Sure.
But the question, law schools also look at this. They want to see, are you retaking it with good reason? Are you retaking it with adequate time to change something from your previous attempt so you'll do better? Again, they're looking for good judgment here. And part of that is taking it only when you feel confident you'll do well.
Yeah, we had a related question to that, and in my opinion, you just answered it. But just to bring it up, someone asked that basically about do top 14 schools especially care about how many times you've taken the LSAT?
It comes down to good judgment. So if you've taken it 6 times and some of those were consecutive opportunities to take it, they're wondering, what's your judgment? Are you really evaluating your abilities to see that you'll do reasonably well or achieve your fullest potential on this exam? Same goes for cancellations. Same goes for absences, which should really never happen because you can withdraw. But they want to know that you're exercising proper judgment. The good news is that you can withdraw even the day before, and law schools will never even know that you were registered for that test date. So you want to minimize, certainly absences should never occur, and also minimize your cancellations. A cancellation is a big question mark. And since law schools don't average multiple scores, there's really never any reason to cancel. And there is reason to retake if you allow adequate time and if you are confident you could do better.
Right. I definitely want to stay on top of the questions here. There is one question for me, and I think any questions people have for me, I'm happy to answer. I'll probably answer them at the end, though, so we can stay on topic for the LSAT for now, if that's okay with you, Steve.
Sure.
But we do have one more question regarding the LSAT that's in the chat here from Olivia, asking what the average time one should spend on diagramming a logic game is, and if that magically makes answering the rest of the questions on the game easier.
Yeah, it can certainly seem magical. I mean, if you make a ton of inferences up front that unlock the game for you, that could make the questions a breeze. And this happens a lot. And I certainly make that apparent in my logic games explanations. I'll show you exactly how I walk through them. And yeah, a lot of upfront work can make the game run very smoothly. But not all games are like that. Some games don't lend themselves to tons of upfront work. Some will have, especially those tough curveball games on recent exams, you'll have very little you could do up front, and you're doing much more work over the course of the game. You see that especially with pattern logic games, which are one of the more rare logic games types. I wouldn't focus on them, but that's a type where not as much you can do up front. So to answer Olivia's question directly, I would say some games you might spend 3 to 4 minutes diagramming up front, making multiple main diagrams that unlock the game's major possibilities. But for other games, it might just be a minute or two where you're simply laying out the rules, you're checking for inferences and realizing that there's not a ton you can do, and that's just the nature of the game. So be ready for anything is what I'm saying. Be ready for a variety of possibilities in terms of how games unfold. And the best way, of course, to be ready for those is to do as many released games as possible and redo them until the patterns become apparent to you.
Right, exactly. If you can learn to recognize the pattern up front, you'll know if it's one of those games where spending over half your time that you have allotted for that game is worth on the diagram. I think I was really lucky when I took my LSAT, and they were all ones that it was like worth taking that for. I think one I even spent 5 minutes, but it was worth it because then the 5 questions that I had regarding the game, I was done within like 30 seconds each because I had done all the work without knowing it right at the beginning.
That's amazing how that can work.
Yeah. All right, let's go back to our pre-listed questions. And again, everyone in the chat, please keep sending them in. And anything that is for me, I will answer at the end. Okay, I think the last question that we had for the digital LSAT is another more general one. Just beyond taking the tablet and going to the LSAC's resources, is there any other recommended preparations that you think people need to take for the digital LSAT specifically?
Well, one thing I would say is about the fundamental nature of digital LSAT is that you can only see one question at a time. So that's something else you would want to get used to. And just to lay out a little bit more about what LSAC offers right now, they have 3 exams in the digital LSAT format, exams 71, 73, and 74, which are real, relatively recent exams from 2014 or so. So they reflect adequately the modern LSAT. And so I would suggest getting a tablet and practicing those digital LSATs so you can see exactly what the format is like. And again, one thing is you can only see one question at a time. So one really low-tech way you might simulate that if you didn't have a tablet would be just cut a hole in a piece of paper the size of one LSAT question, overlay it on top of your book so that you can mimic that style and get used to it. Because right now, especially with logic games and reading comp, you're used to getting that bird's eye view of the entire spread of questions associated. You can no longer do that on digital. You'd have to click left and right. So I would suggest imitating that as well. That's one of the biggest digital LSAT changes I would say. And of course, this is not a content change. It's only a format change or a change in the way they deliver the information. But these little differences are important. I don't want to overstate them, but it's important to be familiar with and prepared for what it's going to be like.
Right. Well, it's like the same thing of where they say if you were chewing a certain type of gum while you studied, like you should chew that type of gum at the test. I'm not the LSAT, don't chew gum at the LSAT. But it's that idea of familiarity and knowing what it looks like, what the area feels like. I would recommend while you're studying for the LSAT to put yourself in an environment that's as close to the testing environment as possible, because it's that same concept. It's what is your environment like while you're studying, and making it as close as possible to the environment that you're going to be in when it actually matters.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one thing that you talked about was how it comes down to good judgment for when it comes to taking the LSAT. Are you ready? Have you studied significantly? Probably don't take it if you haven't. When do you recommend that students actually start that studying process, though?
Whenever you have the time. I mean, for a lot of folks, it could be over a summer break during college or during winter break, the holidays, or if you just have a lighter course load one particular semester in college. But I recommend a minimum of 5 to 6 months in order to achieve your fullest potential on the LSAT. Some folks try to do it in 2 to 3 months, and that's fine. But if you really want to make the most of this, given the LSAT's importance in the admission process, I would give it more time. So don't take on the LSAT prep while you've got a ton of other things going on. If you can lighten your course load in college or lighten your load at work, or maybe not have to take extra time or time and a half at work for overtime, then try to fit it in after work. But you really need support from friends, family, employers, colleagues to make this experience that's going to be one that's valuable for you, really giving it the time that it requires.
And during that 5 to 6 months, is that a certain amount of time per week? Does it change as you go? What does that 5 to 6 months breakdown to look like?
Yeah, great question. So I would say minimum 10 to 15 hours per week. And that could be 5 hours on the weekend and then an hour or two per day on the weekdays. So it'll vary based upon personal situations. And I built in flexibility into my LSAT study plans for that very reason. I built in days off because I recognize that you can't necessarily put in 2, 3, 4 hours every single day. I was talking with one student earlier today who is taking it in July, and she wanted to put in 7 hours a day. And I'm like, how are you going to maintain that for 7, 8 months? And she was like, do I run the risk of burnout? I'm like, of course. Like, how long have you been doing this for? Like, a week. Well, of course, it's not going to work for that long of time, of course. Other things will come up. Nobody can shut out the rest of the world 7 hours a day for 7, 8 months. It's just not doable. And if you do that, your brain will be totally fried by the end.
Yeah,
Slow and steady wins the race on this one.
for sure. And I think it's important that you noted that it does change a little bit based on your situation. If you're in a situation where you can't put in 15 to 20 hours a week, you might need a longer period of time. In my situation where I was studying, it was really weird. I had like the most hectic schedule of my life while I was studying for the LSAT. And so I would have certain weeks where I had put a big chunk of time and I could study for 20 hours that week. And then I had 2 weeks in a row where I didn't open a book once. But then my last month of studying was 24/7. Like, all I did was study for the LSAT. And so it looked a lot more varied for me, but I agree that if you can do something that's consistent, slow, and steady, that's definitely the ideal schedule for studying. For everybody, though, I think that the last week before you take the LSAT should be pretty consistent across the board. What do you think about that?
Totally. And I can certainly relate to the idea of like ramping it up as you get closer to the exam. A lot of times over a 3 month period or a 5, 6 month period, you won't do as much as at the beginning. You'll kind of build up slowly, kind of warm up. But once you hit that final month, it's like you're in the thick of it, exam after exam, measure your results. Now, don't just measure them, also review everything you do, everything you get wrong, everything you have difficulty with. So in that final week specifically, I'd say maybe do one exam and review it, but not really anything more than that. If you're studying full time, meaning you have no other obligations, you could do 2 full-length exams in that week, but I wouldn't do anything more than that because this is not the time to learn something new. This is really the time to refine what you've already been doing and to get results you feel good about, to get realistic simulated test day experiences so that when you walk into the exam on Saturday or Monday, depending on what day it is for you, it's going to be like just another practice test. So it's all about properly simulating test day conditions strictly timing yourself, and of course doing 5 sections, not 4.
Right. And speaking of test day, how would you recommend preparing for that test the night before, morning of?
Yeah, well, definitely preparation involves starting early. So getting everything together the day before, your gallon size Ziploc bag, your admission ticket, your pencils, eraser, snacks, photo, all of that stuff, have it ready to go. Your government issued non-expired photo ID, have that as well because you'll need it. Get that all together so that you're not scrambling the morning of. And of course, know where your test center is, know how to get there, have a backup way to get there just in case of anything, and of course, leave early. And also bring some warm-up questions like a photocopied game or reading comp passage or a couple of logical reasoning questions so that the first problems you're doing on test day are not the scored ones that count.
Oh, that's interesting. I haven't heard that tip before, but I like it. The last question that I have prepared for you, although chat is still open to everybody else, is how should students prepare for an LSAT retake? Does it look different than the first time you took the test?
Yes and no. I mean, the ultimate fundamentals remain the same. So building the foundation, the difference is that you're building a foundation in weak areas specifically. You want to target areas that you know give you trouble. Because it's not your first rodeo, like you already know certain things you've got down. You know that you like games, you don't like reading comp, certain logical reasoning question types give you trouble. Focus on those specifically. Drill them by type and also review fundamentals about those. So watch videos on those question types, read textbook chapters on those types specifically, then do several problems of those types alongside doing individual timed sections and full-length exams. And I'd say since you've already built a lot of your foundation, presumably by that point, more of the focus will be on timed practice and full-length exams.
Awesome. Looks like we have a new question in the chat for you, Steve. Are the new LSAC exams, for example, number 83, better than the older ones when it comes to beginning your studying process?
The newer ones are certainly more relevant. So I'd want you to spend more time on newer exams relative to older ones. So if you're studying over, let's say, a 3-month timeline, you might only want to focus on the most recent 20 or 30 exams. And we're currently up to exam 89 or so. So that means going back to 59, don't study from the exams in the 30s if you've only got 3 months, because I wouldn't want you to do older exams at the expense of the newer ones. At the same time, though, every numbered LSAT is in the current format with a few exceptions. So it's all fair game. But on average, more recent is more relevant. And the biggest change in recent years was that starting with June 2007 LSAT, they switched the reading count from being 4 long passages to 3 long and then 2 short dual passages. And so everything from June 07 to present reflects the modern format without any significant changes.
Sure. And I understand the inclination people might have to try to pay less for the older exams because they are cheaper. In my experience, if anyone cares, I would advise if you have a longer period of time to maybe use the old exams as just individual practice questions and not so much to spend 4 hours taking the whole thing. Whereas using the newer tests for the full length practice exams or practice sections, I think is worth the extra couple dollars, especially when you consider how much money you get for every single point increase on the LSAT. That was definitely my experience. I don't remember what the number was. It's on my website because I talk about it. But it was something like over $100,000 was the difference in 1 point in my experience for my scholarship, because I ended up hitting the lowest number possible, 169 at my school for this year for what a full ride tuition could qualify for. And so if I had gotten a 168, that's 1 or 2 less questions accurate, I would have lost a lot of money that I ended up offering. So I would definitely recommend, if you have a couple extra dollars, even if it's $10, or if you're looking for a larger investment like an LSAT coaching course, I really think it pays out huge dividends if you can afford it up front, for sure.
Oh, that's totally true. I couldn't agree more. I mean, the value of a single point or two could mean thousands in scholarship money or getting into a better law school. And so the ROI on that over the course of your entire career is enormous. And it's really, almost all of the exams are available in books of 10 for about 20, 25 bucks on Amazon. It's only the newest exams that are individual that are $10 a pop.
Right.
But that's really at this point, I mean, there's a book of 72 to 81. So you're only looking at exams 82 to 89 or so that are individual. Those are the only ones you have to get individually. You don't have to get them now. I mean, you get only the books of 10 to start with, and then get the individual ones later in that final month before the exam.
Absolutely. I don't think even that last one you mentioned was available when I took it. I think that those were still on the list that I had to get individually if I wanted to take them.
Yeah, they probably were. But I think actually the most common mistake, the most common reason folks use those oldest exams is because that's what bookstores carry. For some strange reason, bookstores don't know about the LSAT. They just buy whatever sells the best. And those old books have the most official sounding names. I mean, which sounds more official, 10 actual or 10 more? 10 actual sounds really classic and official. And so it's like buying the first in a series, but this isn't like a numbered series of novels, right? This isn't like Game of Thrones where you got to read them in order. This is LSAT prep tests where actually the newest ones are the most relevant, and only a total gunner who's going to do every exam released should bother to get the oldest book of 10.
Right. There's actually somebody not at WashU, but at my undergrad at Wheaton who apparently did like all 70 that were available at the time. And I think he still got like a score pretty close to mine. I think you definitely hit a point of marginal returns after doing a certain amount of tests. So I don't think that's really necessary.
Certainly. Yeah, no, it's not about the quantity. It's about the quality of the review. You could do half the exams or a third of them. And if you review them in enough depth, that would be equally valuable, or if not more valuable.
We got a couple more questions while we were talking about this. One very specific one. How many questions do you need to go to 166?
Yeah, it's going to vary based on exam to exam because the exams vary slightly in terms of their difficulty. The raw score conversion charts account for this. So you can actually open any exam and look at the raw score conversion at the end, and it'll tell you how many questions you need to get right. And then, of course, by definition, by negation, they're telling you how many you could get wrong. It's going to be something around 15 questions, but it's going to vary slightly.
Definitely. If you're planning to take the LSAT in April and are just beginning studying, when is it appropriate to start timing yourself and simulating the test?
Well, that gives you about, since we're recording this in December, it's giving you about 5 months or so. I'd say which is a good amount of time. I would say the first couple of months should be more untimed work. And then once you've built a foundation in a specific section, then you could transition to doing timed work. And so I'd say start with games, master the basics, build the foundation, do individual games by type, then do individual timed games sections, and then alongside that, do untimed logical reasoning. So it'll be a mix of timed and untimed work, but I would start doing timed work within the first 4 to 6 weeks to start introducing that factor because it is an important one.
Definitely. Let's see. For law school applications, how does it work with retaking the LSAT? I tested it in November, so that would be a month ago, but my retest is in January. Should I wait until after I test in January for my applications?
Yeah, I wouldn't submit until you retake because you don't want them to accidentally consider your application without the January results. You don't want them to potentially reject you before you get your January result back. You did well on January, then you got to wait a cycle for a reevaluation. Just hold off, hit submit after the score comes out.
Yeah. And something I would say that's sort of related to this is be in contact with the admissions teams from the different law schools that you're applying to. I cannot stress enough how incredibly helpful that was for me, not only submitting my applications, but also receiving the scholarship I did, and just getting information about whether I would even like the school just based on my communication with them. So that goes for questions like this. If you think that a school might have a different policy, or if they say something on their application like just submit your retakes later or whatever it may be, admissions teams, literally their job is to be there to help you with those kinds of questions. And if you submit a question to them and they don't answer you, or they're unkind in their answer to you, that probably tells you something about whether you should go to that school in the first place.
So true. But my experience, honestly, I've done a lot of webinars with a lot of admission officers. I know a lot of them, and they're very nice. They're very open, at least the ones I talk to. And they're really looking to help folks navigate the process. They want the best for you, and they want to do whatever they can to help you get into their school. And so I did a class yesterday with the Maryland Law School admission officer, University of Maryland, Carey Law. And he was saying that if you get rejected and you want to reapply, reach out to them and they will talk you through what they can do to help you get in with it, what you might need to change if you need to change your personal statement or retake the LSAT, what have you. They'll tell you what score you need sometimes.
Oh, that's nice. I didn't even think to ask that. But that
Yeah,
just goes to my point. Ask them everything. For the most part, they're awesome. If you get all the questions right on LR and RC, but not on LG, can you still shoot your shot for 170 and above?
you can. That you certainly can. If you could get perfect on reasoning and reading comp, you could, of course, get a 170 plus if you got very few wrong on games, but you could get maybe 5 or 10 wrong. Typically, the average 170 scorer gets perfect on games and then -3 on each of the other sections. That's your typical 170 breakdown. And so this suggested breakdown would be the flip opposite of that. But
Yeah.
theoretically, it's possible.
Sure. Yeah, I'd agree with that. Makes sense to me. Logic games, I feel like, is the easiest to memorize how to do. It doesn't require as much thinking once you've just routinely like machined your brain into figuring out how to solve them. Yeah, everything you said, I agree with.
Yeah, I have one comment on that actually. It's you said like memorize how to do them. It's really, to me, it's more about pattern recognition, where
Sure.
like especially the games like ordering and grouping that fit into neatly defined categories. Those, if you watch enough explanations, you can get a rhythm of it, and then it'll be smooth for you. But those curveball games, they require a bit more adaptation. And so one recent change in the last couple of years, I would just encourage folks to note is that on those tougher curveball games, they require a bit more of a flexible, adaptive approach. And that's part of what makes them tougher. And so I think games require a bit of extra work compared to even how they might have been a couple of years ago.
Okay. Denise asked, how long does it take for scores to post once you've taken the LSAT?
Well, the funny thing is that even though it's digital, it still takes just as long. Fun. So it takes about 3 weeks, and that has not yet changed. Hopefully with time, with the digital LSAT, that's one other change I foresee in the future is that they will get scores back faster. That's my prediction. They have not made any promises, but with time, I think that will come. But right now, it's approximately 3 weeks. And unlike in previous years, with that new LSAC president, they are actually releasing scores on the date they said they would, as opposed to in previous years, they would release them randomly a couple days early with no warning. Scary. So the new regime is that you get your scores on the date they say they will be released, and those are posted on LSAC's website.
Okay, awesome. You are welcome, Denise. I totally did lots to deserve that. Thank you. So I'll go ahead and start reviewing the questions that said Nicole at the beginning of them. Let's see. From my point of view, do I think it's doable to have a part-time job in law school? It depends on what year you are. So your first year, I would not recommend having a job. And actually, a lot of law schools literally won't let you have a job. Your job is to be a law student. It is more than full-time. I think it's something like ABA requires 2 hours of outside classwork for every 1 hour inside class. Now I'd be lying if I said I actually did that all the time, but there's many times where I spend more than that, especially when you get closer to exam period. I understand there's some people in situations where they need a part-time job and they just have to make it work, and I don't want to discount that or say that you're doing something wrong. But if you have the more common experience of a law student who is going to law school to dedicate all their time to that, that's what you should be focusing on. Let's see. And Steve, if you have anything to add to these, you are welcome to. Let's see. Do you feel like studying for the LSAT made you any smarter or better equipped for law school than you may have been before studying for the LSAT? So we touched on this a little earlier, actually. The LSAT tests very similar skills to the ones that you need in law school. You're never going to be asked a logic game question while you're sitting in the classroom, ever. That will not happen. But the same kind of neuro pathways that you're digging out while you're studying for the LSAT are the same ones that you're going to be using to analyze cases that you're reading to apply the law, particularly when it comes to law school exams. And someone asked for my information, which I'm happy to provide in the chat in just a minute, but I actually run a YouTube channel and I have a video upcoming hopefully next week regarding law school exams and my experience with them. So if you're interested in more information about that, you can check that out. Let's see, anything else? what was my LSAT score? I had a 169. I only took it once, mostly because I was lazy. Yes, I can provide my, oh, someone already put in there. Yeah, oh, that was you, Steve. Yep, so my YouTube channel is Life as a Law Student. The actual easiest way to find it is to put all those words together with no spaces. I don't have the link or anything right offhand, but I also am on Instagram at LAA Law Student. I'll type that in here for you. And after today, my link for my channel will be on my bio for my Instagram as well. And I have a website with different resources that I offer, including an LSAT course and personal statement reviews, which are super enjoyable for me to get to know you guys. So I'd love to see you guys over on my channel and to talk to you. I'm very active. I don't have too many subscribers that I can't like talk to everybody at this point. Which is, you know, I love to grow, but it's also fun to have like a smaller community where I'm just like texting people all the time that are my friends all around the country and going to law school. So I think that's everything in the chat so far. Is there anything we missed, Steve, that you want us to talk about?
No, I think we covered the basics, but I just want to say, actually, Nicole, that I think it's great what you're doing with your YouTube channel, that you're providing a voice and an experience, direct line to a real law student. So for all these law school applicants out there who want to know what it's like, they've been able to follow you on your journey. So I think it's pretty cool that you're doing that as a service for everyone out there.
Thank you. It's so fun. And it keeps me accountable too, knowing that anything that I do in law school is eventually probably going to make its way online, because I'm a very like deadline oriented person. I say I'm going to upload once a week, so I have to upload once a week, so I have to think of something to talk about, which because I have no time, being in law school is just going to be whatever I did that day pretty much. So it's fun for me, and it's something that I started because I didn't really see any resources like that when I was going to law school. I had all these questions and was doing it all by myself. And I was like, man, I wish somebody would just explain to me like what I'm supposed to know, what questions I'm supposed to be asking, because I'm confused, but I don't know what I'm confused about, kind of thing. And so I've had a lot of positive feedback from people who are finding the admissions process much more approachable now that they've seen my videos and had direct access to me to ask questions. And I really, truly love doing it. So thank you for being so supportive along this whole journey. I remember you like commented on my very first video ever, and I was like, oh, somebody sees me. And now that video has something like 8,000 views, which to me is nuts because it started with 12 subscribers that were all my family and friends.
No, it's pretty awesome. I mean, you definitely struck a chord with folks, and I think that's great.
Yeah. We have one more question before we go. They made it in just in time. Does every personal statement essay have to be a sob story? No. What if you're not the kind who whines when they write about themselves? I hope you're not. Yeah, so I've been doing personal statement reviews for about 4 months now. I've read dozens of them. I think that the best ones have nothing to do of whether it's a sob story or not. It's really just about talking about who you authentically are and what perspective you can bring to law school. Sometimes that does manifest in a story of hardship and struggle and challenge, but sometimes it's just the opposite. It's like, I've been able to accomplish this and this and this and this, and that's going to make me a great contributor to the legal profession in general and the conversations that you have in a law school classroom. So yeah, if you have more questions about that, again, videos on my channel. I'm happy to help anyone with their personal statement if they want. You can get all that information on my website. Let me type that in here as well. Let's make the reader quiet. You don't have to make the reader quiet.
I'll touch on that for a moment. The idea of a sob story, I think it's a risk that you run when you talk about hardships that you've had to overcome. But it's not, I wouldn't focus on the negative part. Don't focus on what you lost. Don't focus on the hardship itself. Instead, focus on what you learned from the experience and how you grew as a person afterwards. And if you can tie that in some way to why you want to go to law school and maybe how you want to help other people avoid having to face similar obstacles or help them navigate those when they encounter them, I think it will make for a more uplifting experience that can make them cry in the end, but it can be tears of joy. tears of joy at how much you've grown from the experiences that you've had to suffer, but ultimately overcome.
Yeah, for me, my law school application was a combination of lots of things that made me me. So my resume included my experience of being an intern at Los Angeles District Attorney's Office. It had a GPA, which thankfully was high. I had my LSAT score, which thankfully was high. And then I had my personal statement, which talked about my perspective as a Christian going into the legal field and how that's informed the way that I look at the world. And so I wouldn't say that my personal statement had anything to do with the sub story, and it actually had less to do with individual challenges I faced than just my perspective going into law school in general. But I found that that combination of all of those different elements of my application were really compelling, and allowed me to go to a school that knew from the get-go exactly who I was, exactly what I was bringing to the table, and knew that I wasn't ashamed of any of those parts of me.
Certainly, yeah. No, it's worth investing some time in making sure you can tell your story in the
Definitely.
application. It is, of course, primarily LSAT and GPA, but those other factors do play a role as well.
Yeah. Okay, looks like Keith is asking about scholarships. Do you provide scholarships for your LSAT courses?
I do. I give a scholarship to those who receive an LSAC fee waiver. I also give scholarships to those who are in the military and those who want to practice public interest law. And I have details for those on my website. And of course, feel free to email me for any clarification on those.
Perfect. Okay, I think we have officially reached the end of this conversation. It's been great to talk to you, Steve, and thank you to all of you who have been watching this live, and to all of you who are watching this when it's uploaded onto my channel later, as well as however Steve ends up using this video. It's been an honor and a privilege, as always, to talk with you about this.
Same, Nicole. Thanks for collaborating with me and looking forward to more in the future.
Definitely. All right, bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining.